Hello everyone, welcome back to Buried Files. Tonight we bring you 7 deeply disturbing true Southern small-town horror stories that will shatter any romantic notions you have about hospitality and charm below the Mason-Dixon line. These are not fictional tales but real accounts from people who discovered that beneath the sweet tea and friendly waves, some towns harbor secrets so dark they have consumed entire generations. Each story has been meticulously documented through court records, witness statements, police reports, and first-hand testimonies from survivors who barely escaped with their lives. The American South contains communities where tradition has twisted into something sinister, where isolation breeds conspiracy, and where asking the wrong questions can make you disappear. If you crave authentic horror content rooted in documented reality, subscribe to Buried Files and activate the notification bell so you never miss our investigations into the cases that law enforcement could not solve and the truth that small towns tried to bury. After you hear these harrowing accounts, share your own experiences with Southern mysteries in the comments below and let us know which story disturbed you the most. Now prepare yourself as we descend into the buried files of 7 towns, where darkness wears a smile and evil hides behind church doors. Addison had lived in Jasper County her entire life. 26 years in a town where everyone knew everyone and secrets were supposed to be impossible to keep. The town sat nestled in the pine forests of southern Georgia, population barely scraping 3,000, where church steeples outnumbered traffic lights and Friday night football was the only entertainment for miles. She worked as a receptionist at the county clerk's office, a position that gave her access to records most people never thought twice about. That access would eventually reveal something that made her question everything she thought she knew about her hometown. Addison had always been the curious type, the kind of person who read through old newspapers at the library and asked her grandmother about family history. Her mother said it was nosiness, but Addison preferred to think of it as an appreciation for detail. That attention to detail served her well at the clerk's office, where she spent her days filing deeds, processing permits, and digitizing records that dated back over a century. The work was tedious, but satisfying in its own way, bringing order to chaos and preserving history that might otherwise be lost. It started on a Tuesday morning in October, when Addison was filing property deeds from the 1970s. Routine paperwork that had been damaged in a basement flood the previous spring and needed to be digitized before they deteriorated further. She was scanning documents methodically, barely paying attention to the contents, when something caught her eye. A property transfer for 40 acres of undeveloped forest land bordering the Ogeechee River. The sale price was listed as $1. That alone was unusual enough to make her pause, but what really drew her attention was the date and the names involved. The seller was Marcus Pritchard. The buyer was William Mason. Both were family names she recognized immediately. Addison pulled the physical deed from the file and examined it more closely. The property description was vague, listing only coordinates and the acreage, with a notation that the land was zoned as agricultural but contained no structures and no road access. The transfer was dated September 15, 1977. She made a note of it and continued scanning, but now she was paying closer attention to the property records flowing past her eyes. 3 hours later, she found another transfer of the same property. September 15, 1984. Sale price, $1. This time the buyer was Thomas Brennan, another family name that went back generations in Jasper County. By the end of the week, Addison had gone through every property record from 1960 to 2000 and made a list. The same 40 acres had changed hands 9 times in that period, always on September 15th, always for exactly $1, always between families that formed the backbone of the town's establishment. The Pritchards, the Masons, the Brennans, the Holloways, the Carters, the Simmons, the Dawsons, the Parkers, and the Reeves. These were not just any families. Marcus Pritchard was the grandfather of the current mayor. William Mason was the father of Sheriff David Mason. The pattern continued through all 9 transfers, connecting people who ran the town council, the school board, the Chamber of Commerce, and every significant business in Jasper County. Addison knew she should probably leave it alone. Small towns had their quirks, their private arrangements, and handshake deals that outsiders would never understand. Maybe it was some kind of tax scheme or a land trust that rotated ownership for legal reasons she did not comprehend. But something about the precision of it bothered her. The same date every 7 years, the same symbolic price, and always between these specific families. She decided to dig deeper. The county clerk's office also maintained vital records, and Addison had access to death certificates and obituaries going back decades. She started cross-referencing the property transfer dates with other records, looking for any connection or pattern. What she found made her stomach turn. Within 6 months of each property transfer, someone in Jasper County disappeared without a trace. Not just left town or moved away, but vanished completely. Missing person cases that were filed with the sheriff's department and then quietly closed with no resolution. September 1977, the first transfer she had found. In March 1978, a drifter named Samuel Cortez, who had been working at the lumber mill, disappeared. The case file noted he was last seen leaving a bar on Main Street. No body was ever found. September 1984, the second transfer. In January 1985, a young woman named Rebecca Holt vanished after her shift at the diner. Her car was found abandoned on Highway 301 with her purse still inside. The investigation lasted 3 weeks and concluded she must have run away, despite her family insisting she would never leave without telling them. September 1991, another transfer. In April 1992, a truck driver from Florida disappeared after delivering a load to the paper mill. His rig was found parked behind the mill, but he was never seen again. The pattern held for every single transfer. 9 property transactions over 42 years. 9 disappearances within 6 months of each transaction. Addison made a spreadsheet documenting everything she had found, and the more she looked at it, the more impossible it seemed to be coincidence. She tried to rationalize it. Maybe small towns just had higher rates of transient populations and unsolved disappearances. Maybe she was seeing patterns where none existed, connecting random events through confirmation bias. But the precision of it haunted her. Always within 6 months. Always after the property changed hands, always victims who were either outsiders or people on the margins of the community with no powerful family connections to push for answers. Addison knew she was probably being paranoid, but she could not shake the feeling that something was very wrong. She started researching the property itself, trying to find out what made those 40 acres special enough to warrant this strange rotating ownership. County tax records showed it had never been developed, never had any structures built on it, and generated no income. It was assessed at minimal value despite bordering the river, which should have made it desirable real estate. Satellite imagery showed dense forest with no clearings or roads visible. Historical maps from the 1800s indicated the land had been part of a larger plantation that was subdivided after the Civil War, but offered no clues about its current significance. She thought about going to the sheriff, but Sheriff Mason's family was part of the pattern. She thought about talking to her supervisor at the clerk's office, but Helen Dawson came from one of the families on her list. Addison realized with growing unease that she could not trust anyone in a position of authority in Jasper County. They were all connected to this, whatever this was. She copied all her research onto a flash drive and stored it in 3 different locations, including a safety deposit box at a bank in the next county. If something happened to her, at least there would be evidence. For 2 weeks, Addison tried to convince herself she was overreacting. She went to work, filed her papers, and kept her mouth shut. But the questions gnawed at her. What was on that property? What happened every 7 years that required a new family to take ownership? And what happened to the people who disappeared? She knew she should let it go, should forget what she had found and go back to her quiet life. But Addison had never been good at letting mysteries rest. On a Sunday afternoon, when most of Jasper County was at church or eating Sunday dinner, Addison drove out to the property. She had memorized the coordinates and used a GPS app on her phone to navigate the back roads. The closest she could get by car was a dirt logging road that ended about a quarter mile from the property line. She parked her Honda Civic in a turnout, checked that her phone was fully charged, and started walking. The forest was thick with pine and oak, the ground soft with decades of fallen needles. It was unusually quiet. No birds singing, no rustle of small animals in the undergrowth. Just the sound of her footsteps and her own breathing. Addison followed a game trail that led roughly in the direction she needed to go, pushing through brambles and stepping over fallen logs. The October sun filtered through the canopy in golden shafts, and the air smelled of earth and decay. After 20 minutes of walking, she found the clearing. It was roughly circular, maybe 50 feet across, and the ground was bare dirt, compacted hard as concrete. 7 stone markers stood in a circle near the center, each about 3 feet tall and carved from granite. Addison approached slowly, her heart hammering in her chest. Each marker bore a name and a date carved into the stone. Samuel Cortez, March 1978. Rebecca Holt, January 1985. James Wheeler, April 1992. The names continued, matching her list of disappearances exactly. The most recent marker read David Okonkwo, February 2020. In the center of the circle was a fire pit, ringed with more stones. The ashes inside looked fresh, gray, and white, with fragments of charred wood still visible. Someone had been here recently. Addison pulled out her phone and started taking photographs, documenting everything. The markers, the fire pit, the clearing itself. Her hands were shaking so badly, she had to brace her elbows against her body to keep the camera steady. She was photographing the 4th marker when she heard engines approaching. Vehicle engines, more than one, coming down a road she had not seen on her walk-in. Addison ran for the tree line, ducking behind a massive oak trunk just as 3 pickup trucks emerged from the forest on the far side of the clearing. Her breath caught in her throat as she watched 6 men climb out of the vehicles. She recognized all of them. Sheriff David Mason, Mayor Henry Pritchard, Thomas Brennan, who owned the funeral home, Carl Holloway from the bank, James Carter, who ran the hardware store, and Robert Simmons, who was on the town council. They were carrying shovels. They walked to the far side of the clearing where the ground looked disturbed, darker and softer than the compacted earth around the markers. Sheriff Mason pointed to a spot and said something Addison could not hear. The men started digging. She watched, frozen in place, as they worked for 10 minutes, 15, 20. They were digging deep, creating a hole easily 6 feet long and 4 feet wide. A grave. They were digging a grave. Addison's phone was still in her hand, set to silent, and she lifted it carefully to take video of what she was seeing. She zoomed in as much as the camera would allow, capturing their faces, their vehicles, the location. Evidence. Whatever was happening here, she needed evidence. The men finished digging and stood around the hole, talking among themselves. Mayor Pritchard checked his watch. They were waiting for something or someone. Addison knew she needed to leave before whatever they were waiting for arrived. She backed away from the tree as quietly as possible, keeping her eyes on the clearing. The men were not looking in her direction. She moved carefully through the forest, stepping around dry leaves and brittle branches, putting distance between herself and that terrible clearing. When she was far enough away that she could no longer see the trucks or hear the men's voices, she turned and ran. She made it back to her car, hands shaking so badly she dropped her keys twice before managing to unlock the door. Addison started the engine and drove. Not back toward town, but in the opposite direction, toward the highway that led to Savannah. She did not feel safe. She did not feel anything except raw animal terror and the certainty that she had just seen something she was never meant to see. Whatever happened in that clearing every 7 years, whatever those 9 families had been doing for over 4 decades, they had killed people. And they would kill her too if they knew what she had discovered. Addison drove straight to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation office in Savannah, 3 hours away, and walked in with her flash drive and her phone full of photographs and video. She told the agent everything she had found, showed him the property records and the list of disappearances and the video of 6 men digging a grave in the woods. The agent listened with increasing intensity, making notes and asking questions. By the time she finished, 2 more agents had joined them. They told her she might have just broken open one of the largest conspiracy cases in Georgia history. The investigation that followed took 8 months and involved the FBI, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, and the state police. They exhumed the clearing with ground-penetrating radar and cadaver dogs. They found 14 sets of human remains buried in that 40-acre plot, some reduced to bone fragments, some still partially preserved by the acidic Georgia soil. The oldest remains dated back to the 1950s, decades before Addison's records began. Whatever ritual or conspiracy those families had maintained, it went back further than anyone had imagined. All 9 families were implicated. Prosecutors called it a murder cult that selected victims from outside the community and killed them as part of a ritual they believed ensured the town's prosperity and protected their power. The trials were sensational, drawing national media attention. 6 men were convicted of murder and conspiracy. 3 more were convicted as accessories. The scandal destroyed Jasper County. Families that had lived there for generations were ripped apart. The town lost its identity, became known not for its history or its football team, but for the horror that had been hiding in the pine forest for decades. Addison testified at every trial, calm and precise, presenting the evidence she had compiled. The defense attorneys tried to paint her as paranoid, attention-seeking, but the bodies in the ground spoke louder than any argument they could make. After the convictions, Addison left Jasper County and never went back. She lives in Atlanta now, works for a nonprofit that advocates for missing persons cases. She refuses to drive through small towns. She checks her rearview mirror constantly, and she knows that some secrets, once uncovered, change you forever. The property was seized by the state and designated as a memorial site for the victims. But locals say if you drive past it at night, you can still see lights moving through the trees, restless spirits waiting for justice that came too late. Ryan bought the farmhouse outside Clarksville, Tennessee for almost nothing, which should have been his first warning. The realtor had been almost desperate to close the deal, barely mentioning the property's history beyond vague references to it being vacant for a decade. Ryan was a writer from Nashville looking for isolation to finish his novel, the kind of peace and quiet that was impossible to find in the city. The 2-story White House with wraparound porch and 100 acres of cotton fields seemed perfect for what he needed. The price was so low, he could afford 6 months of rent up front, giving him time to focus entirely on his work without worrying about money. He moved in on a Thursday in late August, when the heat made the air shimmer and the cicadas screamed from every tree. Ryan was 32, moderately successful with 2 published thrillers and a 3rd book under contract that he was struggling to complete. His editor had been patient, but deadlines were approaching and the manuscript was only half finished. He needed to disappear from his normal life, away from distractions and social obligations, and lose himself in the work. The farmhouse seemed ideal. No neighbors within 2 miles, no internet service, which forced him to write without the temptation of endless online distractions. Just him, his laptop, and the quiet of the countryside. The first week was productive. Ryan fell into a routine of waking at dawn, writing until noon, taking a long walk through the cotton fields in the afternoon, then writing again until dinner. The house was comfortable, if a bit dated, with creaky floors and old furniture the previous owners had left behind. He set up his workspace in the dining room, where windows on 3 sides provided natural light and views of the fields. At night, he would sit on the porch with a drink and watch the sun set behind the tree line, thinking through plot problems and character arcs. The locals in Clarksville treated him with a strange mixture of curiosity and something else Ryan could not quite identify. When he mentioned where he was living, conversations would pause. People would exchange glances. The woman at the grocery store asked him how long he was planning to stay, and when he said 6 months, she just nodded slowly and wished him luck in a tone that suggested he would need it. The man at the hardware store, where Ryan bought supplies to fix a leaky faucet, asked if he had noticed anything unusual about the house yet. When Ryan said no, the man just said to give it time. Ryan dismissed the odd reactions as small-town superstition. Every old house probably had rumors attached to it, ghost stories the locals liked to tell outsiders. He was a thriller writer. He understood how people projected drama and mystery onto ordinary things. But on the 8th night, something happened that he could not explain away. Ryan woke at 3:17 a.m., the time displayed on his phone screen when he checked it. He woke because he heard something, a sound that filtered up through the floorboards from downstairs. Humming. A woman's voice, soft and melodic, humming something that sounded like a hymn. Ryan lay still for a moment, listening, trying to convince himself it was wind in the eaves or the old house settling. But the sound continued, consistent and clearly human. He grabbed the baseball bat he kept by the bed, a habit from living in less safe neighborhoods in Nashville, and crept down the stairs. The humming was coming from the kitchen, and as he moved closer, he could hear other sounds too. Water running, the clink of dishes. Someone was in his kitchen washing dishes in the middle of the night. Ryan's heart hammered against his ribs. He had locked all the doors before bed. He always did. How had someone gotten inside? When he rounded the corner into the kitchen, he saw her. A woman stood at the sink with her back to him, wearing a floral dress that looked like something from the 1960s. Her dark hair pinned up in an old-fashioned style. Her hands moved through the motions of washing dishes. But there were no dishes in the sink. No water running despite the sound he had heard. She was washing dishes that were not there, and she was humming. Ryan's throat went dry. He tried to speak, managed to croak out a weak, "Hello?" And the woman stopped humming. Just stopped, mid-note, and stood perfectly still. The temperature in the room dropped so suddenly Ryan could see his breath. He waited for her to turn around, waited for her to do something, but she just stood there, frozen. Then she vanished, not walked away, not moved out of sight, but simply ceased to exist. One moment she was there, solid and real, and the next moment the kitchen was empty. Ryan turned on every light in the house and did not sleep the rest of that night. In the morning, he tried to rationalize what he had seen. A dream, a hallucination brought on by stress and too much isolation. His mind playing tricks in that space between sleep and waking. But he knew what he had seen, and he knew he'd been fully awake. The woman had been real, or as real as something could be that vanished into nothing. He decided to research the house's history, drove into town and spent the afternoon at the county library going through newspaper archives and property records. What he found made his blood run cold. The woman was Lucy Brennan, who had lived in the farmhouse with her husband Thomas from 1962 until 1978. According to multiple newspaper articles from October 1978, neighbors had reported hearing screams coming from the farmhouse late one night. When police investigated, they found a scene so disturbing it was described in the papers only in vague terms as evidence of extreme violence and ritualistic in nature. Ryan read every article he could find. Lucy's body had been found in the basement, dismembered on a table Thomas had constructed specifically for that purpose. The walls of the basement were covered in religious text mixed with symbols police and religious scholars consulted could not identify. Some appeared to be corrupted versions of Christian iconography. Others resembled occult symbols. The prevailing theory was that Thomas Brennan had suffered a psychotic break, developed delusional religious beliefs, and killed his wife as part of some twisted ritual he believed God had commanded. Thomas had been found hanged in the barn 3 days later. The autopsy revealed he had not eaten regular food in the days before his death. Instead, his stomach contained fragments of human bone. The implication was clear and too horrifying to state directly in the newspaper articles. But Ryan understood. Thomas had cannibalized his wife's body before taking his own life. The house had sat empty for years after the murders. It changed hands multiple times over the decades, sold at auction for back taxes, bought by investors who could not find renters, eventually falling into disrepair. According to the property records, no one had lived there for more than a month at a time. Previous tenants all left suddenly, breaking leases and forfeiting deposits. Ryan found references in local newspaper archives to complaints about the property. Neighbors reporting seeing lights in the windows when the house should have been vacant. Hearing sounds of screaming late at night. Ryan sat in the library until closing time, reading everything he could find, and realized with growing dread that he was living in a house where something terrible had happened. Something violent enough and evil enough to leave an imprint that persisted decades later. He thought about leaving immediately, packing his things and breaking his lease just like all the other tenants before him. But he had paid 6 months' rent up front. He had a book deadline, and some stubborn part of him, the part that wrote about danger and darkness for a living, wanted to understand what he was dealing with. That decision was a mistake. The woman appeared again the next night, and the night after that, always at 3:17 a.m., always in the kitchen, always washing dishes that did not exist. Ryan tried speaking to her, tried asking what she wanted, but she never responded. Just hummed her hymn and washed her phantom dishes and vanished when he got too close. But then Thomas started appearing too. Ryan would see him in the basement, standing near the old work table that was still down there, staring at nothing. Or in the barn, standing on a stool beneath the same rafter where he had hanged himself, a rope in his hands. The house felt different after Ryan knew its history. Every sound became sinister. Every shadow held potential threat. The floorboards that creaked in the night were not just the house settling, but footsteps of the dead moving through rooms they had occupied in life. The temperature fluctuations were not just old windows and poor insulation. but the presence of something that should not still exist. Ryan tried to keep working on his novel, but concentration became impossible. He was exhausted from lack of sleep, jumping at every noise, and beginning to see Lucy and Thomas even during the day. It was not just seeing them that broke Ryan's resolve. It was the feeling that accompanied their presence, a crushing weight of despair and rage and madness that made it hard to breathe. Whatever Thomas had become in his final days, whatever religious mania or psychological break had driven him to commit murder and cannibalism, it was still there in the house, and it was angry. Objects would move on their own. Doors would slam. And every night at 3:17 a.m., Ryan would wake to the sound of footsteps climbing the stairs toward his bedroom. Slow and deliberate, stopping just outside his door. Ryan lasted 3 weeks before he abandoned everything and left in the middle of the night. He threw his laptop and a few clothes in his car and drove back to Nashville without looking back. He contacted the realtor the next morning, demanding to know why she had not disclosed the property's history. The realtor was apologetic but firm. Tennessee law only required disclosure of deaths that occurred within the last 3 years. The Brennan murders were from 1978, more than 40 years ago. Legally, she had no obligation to tell him what had happened there. Ryan lost his deposit, lost the rent he had paid up front, lost most of his belongings that he was too afraid to go back and retrieve. He tried to salvage the novel he had been working on, but everything he had written in that house felt tainted somehow, contaminated by the darkness he had lived with for 3 weeks. He eventually started over completely, writing a different book about a different subject, as far removed from haunted houses and murder as he could manage. The farmhouse outside Clarksville is still for sale. The price drops every year as the realtor becomes more desperate to move the property. Ryan knows it will sell eventually. Some unsuspecting person will see the beautiful old house and the 100 acres of fields and think they have found a bargain. They will move in. They will last a few weeks, maybe a month if they are stubborn. And then they will leave like all the others, fleeing from Lucy and Thomas Brennan, who remain in that house, trapped in an eternal repetition of whatever horrific ritual binds them there. Local teenagers dare each other to spend the night there, though few make it past midnight. And locals say if you drive past the property at night, you can see lights in the windows and 2 figures moving through the rooms. A woman washing dishes that do not exist, and a man standing in the basement over a table that should have been destroyed decades ago. Ryan will never go back. Some places are beyond redemption, soaked in violence too profound to ever be cleansed. That farmhouse is one of them. Lucy worked the night shift at the Waffle House off Highway 82 outside Greenwood, Mississippi. A job she had held for 3 years since dropping out of community college to help support her mother after her father passed away. The restaurant sat at a lonely crossroads where cotton fields stretched in every direction, and the nearest house was 2 miles away. The building was a beacon of fluorescent light in an ocean of darkness, visible from the highway for miles in both directions. Most nights were quiet, just truckers passing through and the occasional drunk stumbling in from the roadside bar 6 miles down the highway. Lucy had seen strange things working overnight, the kinds of people who only came out when the world was sleeping. But nothing prepared her for the man who walked in on a Tuesday night in November. Lucy had always been good at reading people, a skill she had developed working late shifts in a place where being alone with strangers was part of the job. She could tell within 30 seconds of someone walking through the door whether they would be trouble or not. The drunk guys were usually harmless, just loud and sloppy. The truckers were tired and quiet, wanting food and coffee before getting back on the road. But occasionally someone would come in who set off alarms in her head. People whose eyes were too focused or whose smiles did not reach their eyes. And Lucy had learned to trust those instincts. The man walked in at 2:30 a.m. on a Tuesday, the deadest shift of the week. Lucy was wiping down tables and half watching a rerun of some crime show on the television mounted in the corner. She heard the door chime and looked up to see him standing in the entrance, looking around the empty restaurant like he was memorizing the layout. He was maybe 40, wearing expensive clothes that looked out of place in a Waffle House at 2:30 in the morning. Dark slacks, a button-down shirt, leather shoes. But the clothes were covered in red dust, the kind that came from walking through Mississippi farmland. He sat at the counter, right in front of where Lucy stood, and when he looked at her, something cold crawled down her spine. His eyes were too intense, too focused, like he was examining her rather than just looking at her. She pulled out her order pad and gave him her standard greeting, asking what she could get for him. "Coffee and eggs," he said, "scrambled with cheese." His voice was soft, almost polite, but it made her skin crawl. Lucy poured his coffee and put his order in through the window to the cook, Marcus, who had worked the night shift with her for 2 years. She busied herself with other tasks, refilling napkin holders and salt shakers, anything to avoid standing still where the man could watch her. But she felt his eyes on her constantly, tracking her movements around the restaurant. When she brought his food, he asked her name. "Lucy." He repeated it slowly, like he was tasting the word. "Pretty name." She thanked him and started to move away, but he kept talking. When did her shift end? Did she live nearby? Did she live alone? Every instinct Lucy had developed over 3 years of working nights told her to lie. So she did. Her boyfriend was picking her up at 6 when her shift ended. She lived with 3 roommates in Greenwood. Her manager was in the back office doing paperwork. All lies. But the man smiled like he knew exactly what she was doing. He ate his eggs slowly, never taking his eyes off her. When he finished, he left a $100 bill on the counter for a $12 meal and walked out without waiting for change. Lucy watched through the window as his car, a black sedan with no visible license plate, sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes. Just sat there, engine running, headlights pointed at the restaurant. Marcus came out of the kitchen and stood beside her, staring at the car. He asked if she wanted him to call someone, but Lucy said no. The man had not done anything illegal. He had not threatened her. He was just sitting in his car. Eventually, the sedan drove away, turning south on Highway 82, and Lucy tried to convince herself she would never see him again. But he came back the next night. Same time, 2:30 a.m., walking through the door like he had every right to be there. Same seat at the counter, same intense stare. This time he did not order food, just coffee that he barely touched while he watched Lucy work. She tried to ignore him, tried to focus on her tasks, but the weight of his attention was suffocating. When her co-worker Sarah arrived for the morning shift at 5, the man finally stood up, left another $100 bill on the counter, and walked out. The third night, Lucy asked Marcus to stay close, to not leave her alone in the front of the restaurant. The man showed up at 2:15 a.m., earlier than before, and this time he did not sit at the counter. He took the booth closest to the back exit, the one with a view of both doors, and he did not order anything at all. Just sat there, watching her. Lucy's hands shook as she wiped down tables. She felt like prey being circled by something patient and methodical. On the fourth night, Sarah called in sick, leaving Lucy to work the shift alone except for Marcus in the kitchen. Lucy almost called in sick herself, almost made up an excuse, but she needed the money and she was tired of being afraid. She arrived at 10 p.m. for her shift, checked that both exits were unlocked, and kept her phone in her pocket with 911 ready to dial. The man arrived at 2:15 a.m. again, but this time everything felt different, more dangerous. He sat in the same booth near the back exit, but when Lucy glanced out the window, she saw that he had parked his car directly behind hers, blocking her in. Lucy called her manager Lisa, woke her up, and told her what was happening. Lisa told her to lock both doors immediately and call the police. Lucy hung up and turned to lock the front entrance. But the man was already standing there, blocking her path. She had not heard him move from the booth. He was just there, between her and the door, and when she backed up, he followed. He asked why she was afraid of him, asked if she knew who he was, asked if she understood what he wanted. Lucy ran for the back exit, but when she pushed on the door, it would not open. The panic bar did not work. She looked through the window and saw a chain wrapped around the outside handles, securing the door from the outside. Someone had chained it while she was working. The man walked toward her slowly, not rushing, taking his time. He told her she reminded him of someone he used to know, someone he had buried in the cotton fields 30 years ago. He said there were 17 others out there, buried in rows like crops, and Lucy could make it 18. Marcus heard Lucy scream and came running from the kitchen with a heavy skillet in his hand. The distraction was enough. Lucy grabbed the pot of boiling coffee from the burner and threw it directly into the man's face. He screamed, stumbling backward, hands clawing at his burned skin. Lucy smashed a chair through the front window, climbing through the broken glass, cutting her arms, but not caring. She ran for the highway, flagging down a semi-truck that was passing by. The driver called 911 while Lucy sobbed in his passenger seat, shaking so hard her teeth chattered. Police arrived within 10 minutes, but the Waffle House was empty. The man was gone. His car was gone. The chain on the back door was still there, heavy and new, but there was no sign of who had put it there. Marcus told police what he had seen, confirmed Lucy's account, but he had not gotten a good look at the man's face. Lucy gave a description to the detective who responded. Mid-40s, maybe 6 feet tall, dark hair, expensive clothes covered in red dust. No distinguishing marks she could remember except his eyes, which she described as dead and cold. The detective went quiet when she finished. He asked Lucy to come to the station the next day to look at some photographs. When she did, he showed her a file that was 2 inches thick, filled with reports and evidence from unsolved cases across Mississippi and Alabama. The man Lucy described matched someone connected to a string of disappearances in the 1990s. Young women who vanished from truck stops and diners along rural highways. The cases had gone cold, but detectives always suspected the same perpetrator. They had never been able to prove it. Based on Lucy's information about the cotton fields, police obtained warrants and searched farmland around Greenwood with ground-penetrating radar and cadaver dogs. They found 12 sets of remains buried in a grid pattern on abandoned property, each wrapped in plastic, each bearing signs of restraint and prolonged trauma. The victims ranged in age from 19 to 34, all women, all reported missing between 1989 and 2003. DNA evidence linked some of them to the cold cases in the detective's file. But the man was never caught. Despite a massive manhunt, despite the description Lucy provided and the evidence found in those fields, he vanished. Some detectives believe he left the state or the country. Others think he changed his appearance and is still operating somewhere under a different method. Lucy quit the Waffle House that night and never went back. She moved to Memphis, got a job working day shifts at a hospital, and refuses to be alone after dark. She does not drive through small towns anymore. She does not work anywhere with fewer than a dozen other people present. And she checks every parking lot, every car around her, always watching for a black sedan with no license plate and a man whose eyes are dead and cold. She knows he is still out there somewhere. She knows she was lucky to escape. And she knows that somewhere, some other woman is not going to be as lucky as she was. Christopher had been the town doctor in Maplewood, Louisiana for 18 months. A position he had accepted fresh out of residency because the Rural Health Initiative program paid his medical school loans in exchange for 3 years of service in an underserved community. The town was small, maybe 1,500 people. The kind of place where everyone went to the same church and the same diner and knew each other's business before breakfast. Christopher rented a small house behind the clinic and kept mostly to himself, which the locals seemed to appreciate. They were polite but distant, treating him with the same cordial detachment they might show a mechanic or plumber, someone useful but not part of the community. Christopher was from New Orleans originally, accustomed to the diversity and anonymity of city life, and Maplewood felt claustrophobic by comparison. But the work was rewarding in ways his residency at a large hospital had not been. He knew his patients. He saw the same families week after week, treated their chronic conditions, delivered their babies, and helped them manage diabetes and heart disease. The medical practice was straightforward, rural family medicine exactly as he had trained for it, except for the families who never came in. Christopher began noticing patterns in his second month. Certain families never brought their children in for checkups. When he reviewed the records left by the previous doctor, he found gaps spanning years for specific surnames. The Howells, the Duprees, the Guidrys, large families, multiple generations living in the same area, but almost no medical records. When he asked his nurse Penelope about it, she said those families preferred handling things themselves. Old ways, she called it. Traditions that went back generations. But Christopher kept noticing other things. When children from those families did come in, usually dragged by a grandmother or aunt rather than parents, they showed signs of malnutrition, despite living in homes that appeared financially stable. Women from those families would come in with injuries they claimed were from falls or accidents. But the pattern and frequency suggested something else. And every single patient from those 3 families who Christopher examined, had strange scarring on their backs. Geometric patterns, deliberate cuts that had healed into raised keloids, symbols Christopher could not identify, but that looked almost ritualistic. He brought it up with Penelope during a slow afternoon, showing her photographs he had taken with patient permission for medical documentation. She looked at the images, her face going pale, and told him to delete them. When Christopher asked why, she said some things in Maplewood were not his business to question. Some traditions were older than the clinic, older than modern medicine, and doctors who tried to interfere tended not to last long in town. She reminded him that the previous doctor had left after 11 months. The one before that lasted 8 months. Christopher was already at 18 months, which made him the longest-serving physician Maplewood had employed in a decade. Christopher could not let it go. He had taken an oath to do no harm, and what he was seeing looked like systemic abuse. He started documenting everything carefully: the scarring patterns, the injuries, the malnutrition, the defensive wounds he found on some of the teenagers from those families. He kept copies of his notes on an encrypted drive at home, separate from the clinic's official records. He researched the history of Maplewood, looking for context that might explain what he was seeing. What he found disturbed him deeply. Maplewood had been founded in the 1820s by 3 families who had traveled together from Acadia in Nova Scotia, French Catholics displaced by British persecution. They had settled in the Louisiana backcountry, far from New Orleans and Mobile, establishing a community that remained isolated for generations. The Howells, Duprees, and Guidries were descended directly from those founding families. Census records showed they rarely married outside their community, keeping bloodlines concentrated within a small genetic pool. Church records mention tensions with Catholic authorities in the 1800s over unorthodox practices and syncretism with local traditions, but provided no specific details. Christopher was working late one Friday, catching up on paperwork, when a teenager was brought in by his uncle. The boy was unconscious, burning with fever, his breathing shallow and labored. The uncle said the boy's name was Nathan, said he had touched something in the woods and gotten sick. He was evasive about details, claimed he found Nathan collapsed near a creek. But when Christopher examined the boy, he found fresh cuts on his back, infected and weeping pus. The cuts formed the same geometric patterns Christopher had seen as scars on other patients. But these were new, days old, maybe a week at most. Someone had deliberately carved symbols into this child's flesh and left the wounds to fester. Christopher admitted Nathan immediately, started intravenous antibiotics, and called the sheriff. He explained that he had a minor patient with signs of abuse and neglect, wounds that were clearly inflicted by another person. Sheriff Broussard arrived within 20 minutes, which seemed unusually fast for a rural sheriff responding to a clinic call. He asked Christopher to step outside, away from Nathan and his uncle who had been waiting in the lobby. Outside, Sheriff Broussard spoke very carefully, choosing his words with precision. He explained that Nathan was from one of the old families, that his people had traditions that sometimes looked strange to outsiders, but were part of their heritage. He said the cuts on Nathan's back were part of a coming-of-age ritual, that every boy in those families went through it when they turned 13. That it was no different than circumcision or any other cultural practice that involved modification of the body. He suggested that Christopher release Nathan to his family and forget what he had seen. Christopher refused. He said the wounds were infected, that Nathan needed medical treatment, and that ritual scarification on a minor without anesthetic or proper sterilization constituted child abuse under Louisiana law. He said he was required to file a report with Child Protective Services, that his medical license obligated him to report suspected abuse. Sheriff Broussard's expression hardened. He said that 3 doctors before Christopher had left Maplewood within a year, and the smart ones had learned not to ask questions about certain families and their traditions. He said Christopher should think carefully about whether he wanted to be the kind of doctor who respected the community or the kind who caused problems. Christopher filed the report anyway. He called CPS that night, spoke to a social worker in Baton Rouge, and sent copies of his documentation, including photographs of Nathan's infected wounds. The social worker said she would open an investigation, that someone would visit Maplewood within the week to interview Nathan and his family. Christopher felt like he had done the right thing, like he had protected a child who could not protect himself. 2 nights later, Christopher's house burned down. He was at the hospital in the next county visiting a friend when he got the call. By the time he drove back to Maplewood, the fire department had already declared the blaze under control, but his house was a total loss. The fire chief said it looked like electrical failure in the walls, old wiring that had overheated. But Christopher's house was less than 10 years old, built to modern code, and he had never had any problems with the electrical system. His laptop was in that house, his backup drives, all his documentation. Other things started happening. Christopher's car was vandalized in the clinic parking lot, all 4 tires slashed. The clinic's computer system was hacked, patient files corrupted, and backups deleted. Penelope quit without explanation, just left a resignation letter on his desk and stopped answering her phone. And every patient from the 3 old families stopped coming to the clinic entirely. They would drive 40 miles to the next town rather than be treated by Christopher. He received a letter 1 week after the fire. Plain white envelope, no return address, postmarked from Maplewood. Inside was a single photograph showing Christopher leaving his house on a morning before it burned. The photo had been taken from across the street, zoomed in enough to show his face clearly. No note, no message, just the photograph. The implication was clear. They were watching him. They knew where he lived, where he went, what he did, and they could reach him whenever they wanted. The CPS investigation went nowhere. The social worker who had promised to visit never came. When Christopher called to follow up, he was told the case had been closed due to insufficient evidence. The family had denied any abuse. Nathan had told investigators the cuts were self-inflicted, that he had been playing with a knife and accidentally hurt himself. Without the boy's cooperation, there was no case to pursue. Christopher asked about the photographs he had sent, the medical documentation. The social worker said those files had been lost in a server migration, that there was no record of Christopher ever sending them. Christopher finished out his 18-month commitment, but he knew he could not stay in Maplewood. He found a position at a hospital in Oregon, as far from Louisiana as he could get while staying in the continental United States. He reported everything to the state medical board before he left, filed a formal complaint detailing what he had seen and the obstruction he had faced. The board acknowledged his report, but said without cooperation from patients or law enforcement, they had limited ability to investigate. Christopher practices emergency medicine now in Portland, works in a large teaching hospital where everything is documented and monitored, where patient safety is paramount and abuse reporting is taken seriously. But he still thinks about Nathan and the other children in Maplewood. He wonders if they are still being cut, still being marked with those symbols, still suffering infections and pain because of traditions their families refuse to abandon. He reported everything he knew to the FBI before leaving Louisiana, sent copies of his remaining documentation to federal authorities and asked them to investigate. He never heard back. Sometimes Christopher searches news from Maplewood, looking for any indication that someone has finally exposed what those 3 families are doing to their children. But the town is too small to generate much news coverage. The same families still run the parish council. Sheriff Broussard is still in office. And Christopher knows that if he had stayed, if he had kept pushing, something worse than a house fire would have happened to him. Some communities protect their secrets with violence, and Maplewood is one of them. He escaped with his life and his medical license intact. The children of those 3 families were not as lucky. Penelope moved to Liberty Hill, Alabama to take care of her grandmother who had broken her hip and could no longer live alone. The town was tiny, barely 400 people, surrounded by swamps and pine forests, accessible by only one main road that flooded whenever it rained heavily. Penelope had visited as a child, but remembered little beyond mosquitoes and humidity and the suffocating heat of southern summers. Her grandmother's house was old, built in the 1920s, sitting on 2 acres at the edge of town near the swamp. The place felt isolated despite being less than a mile from the town square, as if the trees and water created a barrier between her and civilization. Penelope had been living in Birmingham for the past 8 years, working as a paralegal at a law firm, enjoying the anonymity and diversity of city life. Liberty Hill felt like stepping back in time, a place where progress had stopped decades ago, and the past held more weight than the present. Her grandmother was 87, sharp as ever mentally but physically diminished by the fall that had shattered her hip. She needed help with cooking, cleaning, bathing, and Penelope had taken a leave of absence from work to provide that care. It was supposed to be temporary, 3 months at most, just until her grandmother recovered enough to manage on her own, or until they could arrange for professional home care. The first week was an adjustment. Penelope had to relearn the rhythms of small-town life, the way everyone knew everyone, and privacy was a concept that did not really exist. People would stop by without calling first, bringing casseroles and asking invasive questions about why Penelope was not married yet, and whether she planned to stay in Liberty Hill permanently. Her grandmother's friends were kind but exhausting, their concern feeling more like surveillance than genuine care. It was her grandmother who first mentioned the lights in the swamp. They were sitting on the porch one evening, watching the sun set behind the cypress trees, when her grandmother pointed toward the tree line and said Penelope needed to know about the lights. She said they had been there as long as anyone could remember. Strange glowing orbs that moved through the trees at night. Some people said they were swamp gas, methane rising from decaying vegetation and igniting in the air. Others said they were ghosts, spirits of people who had died in the swamp over the years. But everyone agreed on one thing. You never followed the lights into the water. You never went looking for them. And you definitely never went into that swamp after dark. Penelope thought it was superstition, the kind of folklore every small town had to make itself seem more interesting. But that night, lying in bed in her grandmother's guest room, she saw them through the window. Dozens of pale blue lights drifting through the cypress trees, moving in patterns that seemed almost deliberate. They would cluster together, then spread apart, then move in a line like a procession. They were beautiful in a haunting way, ethereal and otherworldly. Penelope watched for over an hour before finally falling asleep. The next day at the general store, Penelope casually mentioned the lights to the woman behind the counter. The conversation in the store stopped. Everyone turned to look at her. An older man, probably in his 70s, walked over and asked what exactly her grandmother had told her. Penelope repeated what she had heard, that the lights were swamp gas or ghosts, that people avoided them. The old man nodded slowly and said that was true enough. But there was more to the story. He said 50 years ago, some men from Liberty Hill had killed a drifter who had been camping in the swamp. They said he had been harassing women in town, following them, making them uncomfortable. So a group of men took him into the swamp one night and hanged him from a cypress tree. They called it justice. The law called it nothing because no charges were ever filed. But the drifter had not been alone. He had a family, a wife, and 3 children who were camping deeper in the swamp while he came into town for supplies. When they came looking for him, they found his body. And then they disappeared. All 4 of them. No bodies were ever found, no evidence of what happened to them. The old man said people assumed the family had just left, scared off by what happened to the husband. But others believed the men from Liberty Hill had killed them too, eliminated witnesses who might report what really happened. And ever since then, the lights in the swamp had grown brighter, more numerous, moving with purpose rather than drifting randomly. Penelope felt a chill run down her spine despite the Alabama heat. She asked who the men were, the ones who had killed the drifter. The old man said they were all dead now, had been for decades. But their sons and grandsons still lived in Liberty Hill, still ran the town, and the lights in the swamp kept getting brighter every few years, like something was feeding them. He told Penelope to stay away from that swamp, to keep her grandmother's doors locked at night, and to not ask too many questions about things that happened before she was born. But Penelope could not let it go. She was a paralegal, trained to research and document and find evidence. She went to the County Historical Society, a small building attached to the public library, and asked to see newspaper archives from 1974. The librarian was hesitant, said most of those papers had not been digitized yet, were still stored in boxes in the basement. But Penelope insisted, said she was researching family history. The librarian brought up 3 boxes of yellowed newspapers, and Penelope spent the next 4 hours reading through them. She found the story buried on page 6 of the Liberty Hill Gazette, dated October 12, 1974. "Tragic accident claims local drifter," read the headline. The article was brief, stating that a man named Samuel Johnson had been found deceased in the swamp, apparent victim of an accident. No further details were provided. No mention of a hanging. No mention of an investigation. Just a few sentences acknowledging a death and moving on. But Penelope noticed something else. 3 weeks later, another small article reported that authorities were seeking information about a missing family, a woman and 3 children who had been camping in the area and had not been seen since mid-October. The article provided no names, no description, just a request for anyone with information to contact the sheriff. Penelope kept digging through the archives. She found a pattern of disappearances in Liberty Hill that stretched back decades. Every few years, someone would vanish near the swamp. Usually someone from out of town. Usually someone who had caused some kind of problem or upset someone important. A man who had gotten into an argument at the town bar in 1981. A woman who had filed a complaint about harassment in 1989. A teenager who had been arrested for vandalism in 1995. And on and on. 14 disappearances over 50 years, all near the swamp, all unsolved. The newspaper coverage was always minimal, always framed as people who had wandered off or chosen to leave town. Penelope made copies of everything she found, took photographs of the articles on her phone. She knew she should probably leave it alone, should focus on taking care of her grandmother, and then return to Birmingham and her normal life. But something about the pattern bothered her deeply. The precision of it, the way the community had collectively decided to look the other way. The way the lights in the swamp had grown brighter with each disappearance. One night, Penelope heard voices outside her grandmother's house. It was after midnight, and she had been reading in bed when she heard men talking in low voices. She went to the window and saw 6 figures walking toward the swamp, carrying shovels and flashlights. They were dragging something wrapped in canvas, something large and heavy. Penelope grabbed her phone and started recording, zooming in as much as the camera would allow. She recognized 3 of the men. Harold Mason, the police chief, Robert Garrett, who was on the town council, and Tom Henderson, her grandmother's neighbor who had brought over a casserole just 2 days earlier. She watched as they dragged the bundle deep into the swamp, following a path that seemed well-worn despite the difficult terrain. They stopped at a place where the water turned black and the trees grew so thick no moonlight penetrated. They threw the bundle into the water, watched it sink, then stood in a circle. Penelope could not hear what they were saying, but she could see their mouths moving, some kind of ritual or prayer. And then the lights appeared. More than Penelope had ever seen. Dozens of pale blue orbs swarming over the water where the bundle had disappeared, circling and diving like they were feeding on something. The men stood and watched for several minutes, then turned and walked back toward town. Penelope's hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped her phone. She had just witnessed a murder, or at least the disposal of a body. She had video evidence of Liberty Hill's police chief and town council member dumping something in the swamp in the middle of the night. She needed to report this to someone. But who? The police chief was involved. The town council was involved. Local law enforcement was part of whatever conspiracy this was. Penelope called the FBI field office in Mobile the next morning, reported what she had seen, and sent the video to the agent who took her call. Federal agents arrived in Liberty Hill 2 days later, and the town immediately closed ranks. No one saw anything. No one knew anything. When agents interviewed Harold Mason, he said he had been home all night, and his wife confirmed his alibi. Robert Garrett said the same. Tom Henderson said the same. Every person Penelope had identified claimed to have been somewhere else, and their families backed them up. Federal agents searched the swamp with sonar equipment and dive teams, looking for the bundle Penelope had seen them dump. But the swamp was vast and murky, the water black with tannins, the bottom thick with decades of decomposed vegetation and sunken logs. They found nothing in the area Penelope had indicated. After 3 days of searching, they told her there was no evidence of any crime. Without a body, without physical evidence, there was nothing they could prosecute. But Penelope had the video. She posted it online, sent it to newspapers and television stations, refused to let it disappear. Her grandmother begged her to stop, said she was putting both of them in danger. Penelope ignored her. She hired a private investigator, a former detective from Birmingham who specialized in cold cases, and gave him all her research. The newspaper articles, the pattern of disappearances, the video. She asked him to find something, anything that could prove what Liberty Hill was hiding. The investigator worked for 3 months. He brought in specialists with ground-penetrating radar, surveyed areas of the swamp that were accessible, and found anomalies consistent with buried remains. Based on those findings, federal authorities obtained new warrants and returned with forensic teams. They found remains in that swamp, fragments scattered over a wide area by water and wildlife, but enough to confirm human origin. DNA testing eventually matched 11 missing persons cases spanning 4 decades. 3 men were arrested, including Harold Mason and Robert Garrett. Tom Henderson died of a heart attack the day before federal agents came to arrest him. The investigation revealed a pattern of violence that had persisted for over 50 years. A system where Liberty Hill's leadership had eliminated anyone they considered a threat or problem, disposing of bodies in the swamp and relying on community silence to prevent any investigation. The lights in the swamp were just swamp gas, methane igniting in the air. But their appearance had become associated with the disappearances, creating folklore that helped keep people away from areas where bodies were hidden. Penelope testified in federal court. She received death threats. Someone threw a brick through her grandmother's window with a note tied to it that said, "Traitors did not deserve to live." Federal marshals provided protection during the trials. All 3 defendants were convicted, sentenced to life in prison. But Penelope knew there were others involved who had not been charged. The conspiracy went deeper than 3 men. It involved families, institutions, a whole community that had decided some people's lives did not matter. Penelope lives under a different name now, somewhere far from Alabama. Her grandmother passed away 6 months after the trials ended, and Penelope believes the stress of everything that happened contributed to her decline. The house in Liberty Hill was sold. Penelope will never go back. Some towns bury their secrets so deep that disturbing them means risking your life. Liberty Hill buried its secrets in a swamp, and when those secrets were finally exposed, the town never recovered. Penelope barely escaped with her life, And she knows that in small towns across the South, similar secrets remain hidden, protected by communities that value loyalty over justice and silence over truth. Nathan had been driving through northern Arkansas for 6 hours when his car broke down outside of Pineville, a town so small it barely appeared on GPS maps. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, and his phone had no signal. He coasted to a stop in front of what looked like a combination gas station and general store, the only building with lights on for miles in either direction. Nathan was 28, an insurance adjuster from Little Rock on his way to visit a college friend in Missouri, and mechanical problems were the last thing he needed on a Friday evening. A man came out of the gas station before Nathan even had time to pop the hood. He was in his 60s, wearing coveralls and a friendly smile, and he introduced himself as Landon. Nathan explained that his car had just died, lost power completely, and he did not know enough about engines to diagnose the problem. Landon lifted the hood, poked around for a few minutes, and delivered the bad news. The alternator was shot. He could fix it, but he would need to order the part, and it would not arrive until Monday at the earliest. This was Friday night. Nathan was stuck in Pineville for the weekend. Landon seemed apologetic, like this was somehow his fault, and offered to have the car towed to his shop behind the gas station. He said Nathan could stay at the boarding house down the road, that it was clean and cheap and the only accommodation in town. Nathan had no other option. His phone still had no signal. The nearest city was over an hour away. He agreed to Landon's plan, grabbed his overnight bag from the car, and accepted a ride in Landon's truck to the boarding house. The boarding house was a 2-story Victorian painted pale yellow, with a wraparound porch and hanging plants. It looked charming in a faded kind of way, like something from a tourism brochure about quaint southern towns. A woman named Stella came out to greet them, probably in her late 50s, wearing an apron and a warm smile. She said she had a room available on the 2nd floor, that dinner was included if Nathan was hungry, and that Pineville was a lovely place to spend a quiet weekend. Landon left with a promise to call as soon as the part arrived on Monday. Nathan settled into his room, which was clean and sparsely furnished with a bed, a dresser, and a small bathroom. The window overlooked the backyard and a barn about 50 yards away. He could see fields beyond that, corn or soybeans, stretching toward a tree line in the distance. It was peaceful in a way that made Nathan uneasy. Too quiet, too isolated. But he was tired from driving, and dinner smelled good, so he went downstairs to eat. Stella served the pot roast with potatoes and carrots, homemade bread, sweet tea. She asked Nathan questions while he ate. Where was he from? What did he do for work? Was he married? Did he have family? Where was he headed? Nathan answered most of the questions honestly, but something about the intensity of her interest made him uncomfortable. She seemed too interested in whether anyone knew where he was, whether anyone was expecting him. Nathan found himself lying, saying his girlfriend knew his route, that he had told several people he was staying in Pineville for the weekend. Complete fabrications, but they felt necessary. After dinner, Nathan went back to his room and tried to sleep. But around midnight, he heard footsteps in the hallway, multiple people walking back and forth, and the sound of locks being secured, heavy deadbolts sliding into place. Nathan tried his door and found it locked from the outside. He was trapped in his room. He went to the window and looked out, and what he saw made his stomach drop. The backyard had 7 fresh graves, rectangular patches of disturbed earth, darker than the surrounding soil, marked only with small stones at the head of each mound. Nathan stared at those graves, his mind racing. This was not a boarding house. It was a trap. And Stella and Landon were not helpful locals. They were predators who lured stranded travelers to this place and killed them. Nathan tried to stay calm, tried to think logically. The door was locked from the outside, but the window opened. He was on the second floor, maybe 15 feet up, and the roof of the porch was directly below his window. If he could climb out onto that roof, he could drop to the ground and run. He pushed the window open as quietly as possible, squeezed through, and lowered himself onto the porch roof. The shingles were old, and some of them cracked under his weight, making sounds that seemed impossibly loud in the quiet night. From the roof, Nathan could see into the barn. The doors were open and lights were on inside. He could see figures moving around, hear voices arguing. He crept to the edge of the roof and jumped down to the ground, landing hard and rolling to absorb the impact. His ankle twisted but held. Nathan ran, barefoot across the yard, heading for the road and the highway beyond. He made it about 100 yards before he heard dogs barking behind him. Nathan ran faster, his lungs burning, his twisted ankle sending jolts of pain up his leg with every step. He could see the highway ahead, the faint glow of headlights in the distance. If he could just reach the road, flag down a car, get to safety. He burst through the tree line onto the shoulder of the highway just as a semi-truck was approaching. Nathan ran into the middle of the road, waving his arms, forcing the truck to stop. The driver was a middle-aged woman hauling produce to Memphis. She took one look at Nathan, barefoot and terrified and gasping for breath, and told him to get in. She called 911 while Nathan told her what he had seen. The graves, the locked doors, the voices in the barn. The woman drove to the nearest town with a police station, 10 miles away, and waited with Nathan until state troopers arrived. What followed was the largest criminal investigation in Arkansas history. State police raided the boarding house and found evidence that confirmed Nathan's account. The graves in the backyard contained 4 bodies in various states of decomposition. The barn contained tools, plastic sheeting, and a large freezer with human remains inside. Stella and Landon had been operating this scheme for at least 3 years, targeting stranded travelers who stopped at the gas station. Landon would sabotage their vehicles, ensuring they needed to stay overnight, and Stella would gather information to determine if anyone would come looking for them. Those who seemed isolated, who had no one expecting them, would never leave Pineville alive. Police found evidence linking Landon and 3 of his sons to at least 8 murders. They would rob their victims, kill them in the barn, and bury them in the backyard or dispose of the remains in remote locations. The gas station and boarding house were family operations, run by multiple generations of the same family who had lived in Pineville for over a century. Neighbors claimed they had no idea what was happening, but investigators found evidence suggesting some locals had suspected for years and said nothing. Stella and Landon were both convicted of multiple counts of murder and sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole. 3 of Landon's sons received similar sentences. A 4th son, who had been unaware of the family business, testified for the prosecution in exchange for immunity. The boarding house was demolished. The property was seized by the state, and investigators estimated there could be as many as 20 additional victims buried on the property or in the surrounding forests, too decomposed to identify. Nathan testified at all 5 trials, describing his experience in detail. The locked door, the graves, the fear that had driven him to climb out a 2nd-story window and run through the night. Defense attorneys tried to portray him as paranoid, suggested he had misinterpreted innocent circumstances. But the bodies in the ground spoke louder than any argument they could make. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning guilty verdicts. Nathan still has nightmares about Pineville, about being locked in that room, about the graves in the backyard, about what would have happened if he had not looked out the window or if he had hesitated instead of running. He thinks about the people who did not escape, who trusted Stella's friendly smile and Landon's helpful manner and never suspected they were walking into a trap. He thinks about the families who never got closure, whose loved ones disappeared on road trips or business travel and were never heard from again. Nathan sees a therapist now, works on processing the trauma and the survivor's guilt. He will not drive through small towns anymore. When he travels, he stays only in chain hotels in populated areas where security cameras are everywhere and people would notice if he disappeared. He checks in with his girlfriend multiple times a day when traveling, sends his location regularly, maintains a digital trail that would make it impossible for him to vanish without someone knowing exactly where he was last seen. He knows it is paranoid. He knows most people are not predators. But he also knows that Stella and Landon seemed like normal, friendly people, and they had murdered at least 8 people in their charming Victorian boarding house in a town that looked like something from a postcard. The gas station in Pineville is abandoned now. No one wanted to buy it, knowing what it had been used for. The boarding house site is an empty lot, overgrown with weeds. And the town itself is dying, younger people moving away, businesses closing, the population dropping below 200. Nathan thinks Pineville deserves to disappear, to become a ghost town that people drive past without stopping. Some places are built on evil, and no amount of time can cleanse them. Stella had returned to Vicksburg, Mississippi for her father's funeral, the first time she had been back in 12 years. She had left at 18, running from a town that felt suffocating and secrets that felt dangerous. Her father had been the funeral home director, a position his family had held for 4 generations, and Stella was expected to take over the business. Instead, she moved to Chicago and cut off contact with everyone back home. But death brings obligations, and Stella found herself standing in the funeral home she had grown up in, sorting through her father's belongings and trying to sell a business she wanted nothing to do with. The funeral home was Victorian, built in 1890, with high ceilings and dark wood paneling that made every room feel like a tomb. Stella had spent her childhood in this building, playing hide and seek in the casket display room, doing homework in the office while her father worked downstairs in the embalming room. She knew every creaking floorboard, every hidden closet, every secret space. But she had never been allowed in the basement office, her father's private domain where he kept his records and conducted his business. Now that he was dead, she had no choice but to go through everything. The basement office was exactly as she remembered from the few glimpses she had caught as a child. A large oak desk, filing cabinets lining the walls, and shelves filled with leather-bound ledgers dating back over a century. Her father had been meticulous about record-keeping, documenting every funeral service he had conducted over 40 years. Stella started sorting through the most recent ledgers, thinking she would need the information to transfer business records to whoever bought the funeral home. But as she read through her father's entries, she noticed something strange. There were 2 sets of records. The official ledgers documented funerals that appeared in the county death records, services with permits and certificates, and everything legally required. But there were other entries too, written in red ink, describing services that were not in any official records. Bodies that came in the middle of the night, burials conducted without permits, cremations performed without family consent, and names, dozens of names. People Stella recognized from her childhood who had disappeared over the years. Stella's hands shook as she read through entry after entry. Her father had been disposing of bodies for someone in Vicksburg, making evidence vanish, and he had been doing it for 30 years. The red ink entries started in 1985 and continued until 3 months before his death. Some entries were brief, just a name and a date and the word cremated or buried. Others included more details: where the body had come from, who had brought it, how it had been disguised as a natural death or accident. The level of detail suggested her father had kept these records deliberately, documenting crimes he was complicit in. The entries stopped abruptly in June, 3 months before her father died of what everyone believed was a heart attack. The final entry was different from the others. Not a record of a service, but a note written in her father's shaking handwriting. "They know I kept records. God forgive me." Stella stared at those words, understanding flooding through her. Her father had not died of natural causes. He had been murdered because someone discovered he had been documenting their crimes. Stella was photographing pages of the red ink entries with her phone when she heard the back door of the funeral home open. The door that led directly to the basement, the one her father always kept locked. She heard footsteps on the stairs, multiple people and voices she did not recognize. They were coming down to the basement office. Stella looked around frantically for a place to hide and dove into the embalming room, squeezing herself behind the large industrial sink in the corner. Through the partially open door, she could hear the men searching her father's office. They were looking for the ledgers, the records her father had kept. One voice said they should have done this months ago, should have taken care of it when they took care of him. Another voice said they had searched the house and found nothing, that the records must be at the funeral home. A third voice, older and authoritative, said they needed to find those ledgers before anyone else did, that if the wrong person saw them, everyone would go to prison. Stella held her breath. Pressed against the cold tile wall, her phone clutched in her hand. She recognized the older voice now. Judge Harold Simmons, a man who had presided over the county court for 25 years. She heard other names mentioned as the men searched: Police Chief Robert Garrett, District Attorney Michael Preston, the president of Merchants Bank. These were not low-level criminals. These were the men who ran Vicksburg, the ones who controlled law enforcement and the legal system and the economy. The men talked while they searched, and Stella pieced together what her father had been involved in. For over 3 decades, a group of powerful men in Vicksburg had been eliminating anyone who threatened their interests. Business rivals, whistleblowers, journalists asking too many questions, people who knew too much about corruption and criminal enterprises. Her father had disposed of the bodies, making deaths look like accidents or natural causes, or cremating remained so thoroughly that no evidence remained. And he had documented every single one. The men spent 20 minutes tearing apart the office, pulling books from shelves, emptying filing cabinets, searching every drawer and corner. They did not find the ledgers because Stella had them stacked on the desk where she had been reading them, partially hidden under other papers. Eventually, the men gave up and left through the back door, still talking about where else they could search. Stella waited another 10 minutes before moving, making sure they were truly gone. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold her phone. She had photographed over 200 pages of red ink entries, names and dates and methods spanning 30 years. 43 people listed in those records. 43 murders disguised as accidents or suicides or natural deaths. And her father had been complicit in all of them until his conscience finally broke him and he became a liability. They had killed him, made it look like a heart attack, and now they were desperately trying to find the evidence that could destroy them. Stella knew she could not stay in Vicksburg. She could not trust the police because the police chief was part of the conspiracy. She could not trust the district attorney or the courts. She uploaded every photograph to 3 different cloud services, emailed copies to herself at multiple addresses, and then took the physical ledgers. She carried them to her rental car, drove straight to the FBI field office in Jackson, and walked in demanding to speak to the agent in charge. The investigation that followed became national news. The FBI brought in teams from Washington, conducted raids across Vicksburg, and arrested 17 people, including Judge Simmons, Police Chief Garrett, and District Attorney Preston. The ledgers Stella provided documented 43 murders over 3 decades, each connected to a criminal network that had controlled Vicksburg's economy and politics for half a century. Her father's meticulous records included dates, names, methods, and in many cases, who had ordered the killing. It was the most complete documentation of organized crime corruption the FBI had seen in Mississippi history. Stella testified in federal court for 6 days, identifying people from the ledgers, explaining how the funeral home had been used to destroy evidence. She sat in that witness box and answered questions about her father's crimes, about the business he had run and the secrets he had kept. Defense attorneys tried to discredit her, suggested she had fabricated the evidence, but the FBI had corroborated every entry they could verify. Bodies that had been cremated, death certificates that did not match medical examiner reports, disappearances that coincided exactly with dates in the red ink ledgers. The trials lasted 18 months. 14 men were convicted of murder, conspiracy, racketeering, and corruption. 3 more took plea deals and testified against the others. Judge Simmons received 6 consecutive life sentences. Police Chief Garrett received 4. District Attorney Preston received 5. The conspiracy had extended into the state government, implicating 2 state representatives and a state senator who were indicted separately. The entire power structure of Vicksburg collapsed. But the convictions came at a cost. Stella received death threats almost immediately. Letters mailed to her apartment in Chicago describing exactly how they would kill her. Phone calls in the middle of the night, heavy breathing and whispered threats. Her apartment was broken into 3 times. Nothing stolen, but everything disturbed. A message that they could reach her whenever they wanted. Federal marshals provided protection during the trials, but they could not protect her forever. Stella lives under a different name now, somewhere far from Mississippi, somewhere the FBI helped her relocate through their witness protection program. She cut ties with everyone from her old life, abandoned her career and her friends, and started over completely. The funeral home in Vicksburg was demolished after federal investigators finished processing it as a crime scene. The building had been contaminated by decades of illegal cremations and body disposal, and no one wanted to buy property with that history. Stella thinks about her father sometimes, tries to understand how a man who had been kind to her as a child became complicit in dozens of murders. The ledgers suggested he had started small, disposing of a body for someone powerful who paid well and promised protection. Then it became regular work, a second income stream that was too lucrative to refuse. By the time he wanted to stop, he was too deeply involved and knew too much. They owned him, and when he started keeping detailed records as insurance, they killed him. She wonders if her father kept those ledgers hoping someone would eventually find them, hoping his crimes would be exposed and the men who controlled him would face justice. Or if he kept them out of vanity, documenting his role in something terrible because it made him feel important. Stella will never know. Her father took his motivations to the grave, and she will spend the rest of her life dealing with the consequences of his choices. Stella works as a barista now in a city she will not name, living a quiet life under a name that is not her own. She checks over her shoulder constantly. She varies her route to work. She has emergency bags packed and ready in case she needs to disappear again. And she knows that somewhere Someone from Vicksburg might still be looking for her, might still want revenge for the men she helped put in prison. Some towns bury their secrets so deep that disturbing them means risking your life. Her father learned that too late. Stella barely escaped in time, and she will never go back to Vicksburg. The funeral home is gone. The conspirators are in prison. But the town itself remains, and some places never forgive those who expose their darkness.